The toast is almost perfect. Celeste watches her new husband Ian from her seat at the head table. The white tablecloth bunched under her elbows, a champagne flute leaving a wet ring on the linen. The best man, Julian, Ian's friend since middle school, the one who introduced them at a rooftop party 6 years ago, is finishing his speech. He's been funny and self-deprecating and just sentimental enough. The room is warm with it. Her mother is crying. Ian's hand finds hers under the table and squeezes once. Then Julian lowers the microphone, steps off the small platform, and walks directly toward her instead of returning to his seat. The band hasn't started yet. The room is in that liminal space between courses and dancing, between the scheduled emotion and the unscheduled one. Julian crouches beside her chair, one hand on the back of it, his face flushed from the open bar. His eyes are glassy but focused. He leans close enough that she can smell bourbon and the faint chemical sweetness of dry-cleaned suit fabric. "I'm so glad he found you," he says. "I mean it. After everything." She smiles, the practiced bridal smile she's been deploying for 7 hours. "Thank you, Julian. That means a lot." He doesn't move away. His hand stays on her chair back. "No, I mean, you know what I'm talking about, right?" The first cool thread of something wrong slips between her ribs. She doesn't know what he's talking about. She keeps the smile. "I'm just glad he's past it," Julian says. "What happened with Rachel? He never talks about it, but I figured, you're his wife now. He told you, obviously." The music hasn't started. The photographer is circling the cake. At the table beside her, Ian is laughing at something his brother said, head tilted back, unaware. She has maybe 60 seconds before the best man stumbles back to his seat and the evening resumes its shape. "He's told me," she hears herself say. The words come out smooth, automatic. The voice of a woman who has spent her adult life being good in rooms full of people. "Of course." Julian nods, visibly relieved. Good, because she really messed him up. And I needed to know you knew, that you went in with your eyes open." His eyes are too earnest. He's not being malicious. He's being loyal, in the way drunk people are loyal, confessing someone else's secret as an act of protection. He thinks he's honoring Ian by making sure the bride has been properly briefed. He thinks Celeste already knows. He has no idea he's just cracked open a door she didn't know existed and invited her to walk through it alone. She doesn't ask who Rachel is. She doesn't ask what "messed him up" means. She doesn't ask when this happened, or for how long, or what exactly Ian was supposed to have told her. She sits in her wedding dress, her new rings heavy on her finger, and files every word Julian said into a compartment of her mind she will not open again for 364 days. The band starts. Ian turns back to her, beaming. "Dance with me?" She stands. She takes his hand. She lets him lead her to the floor. And Julian, drunk and satisfied, stumbles back to the bar and orders another bourbon, having no idea that he just changed the shape of a marriage before it began. Now, before you decide what Celeste should have done next, before you slot her into the category of women who confront or women who avoid, you need to understand something about the year that followed. This wasn't a woman who lacked courage. She was a woman who understood that some questions, once asked, dissolve the structure they're asked inside of. She had just signed legal documents. She had just stood in front of everyone she loved and promised forever. She wasn't ready to find out whether Rachel was a footnote or a demolition charge. So she did something that will either impress you or break your heart for her. She decided to wait. Not forever, not in some passive, avoidant way. She decided to wait with purpose, to gather information, to watch for cracks, to see if the man she married would eventually become the man who could tell her the truth on his own. She gave him a year. Not because she was weak, because she wanted to know whether the problem was the secret or the person keeping it. And that decision, the one made on her wedding night, in a dress she'd never wear again, while a man she barely knew swayed toward another drink, is the reason this story doesn't end the way you think it does. The year passed in a series of almosts. Celeste became a student of her own marriage, not in a paranoid, checking his phone way. That wasn't her. She was methodical, observant. She started keeping a mental log, the way she used to track project milestones at work. Not of what Ian did wrong, of what he didn't do at all. He never mentioned anyone named Rachel, not once. He never told a story from his 20s that featured a serious ex. His dating history before Celeste was a collection of vague anecdotes. Someone I was seeing. It didn't work out. That was a weird time. She'd never pushed. Early in their relationship, she'd appreciated that he wasn't the type to catalog past girlfriends over dinner. It felt mature. Now it felt like a locked room in a house she was already living in. She almost asked him 3 times. The first time was 2 months after the wedding. They were unpacking boxes in the new apartment, and she found a photograph tucked inside a book he'd brought from his old place. A group shot from what looked like a summer barbecue. Ian in his mid-20s, his arm around a woman whose face was half turned away. She held it up. "Who's this?" He glanced over, expression unchanged. "Just some old friends. I don't even remember where that was." He went back to unpacking. She put the photo in a drawer and didn't look at it again. The second time was at his birthday dinner, 6 months in. His mother got tipsy on sangria and said, apropos of nothing, "We were so worried about you for a while there, sweetheart, but you're good now. You found Celeste." Ian's jaw tightened, just for a beat, then released. "Mom, it's my birthday. Let's not." The table laughed. Celeste laughed. She didn't ask what his mother meant. She filed it. The third time was the closest she came. They were in bed, lights out, that liminal space where people sometimes confess things they can't say in daylight. She said, "Can I ask you something?" He said, "Anything." The words sat in the dark between them. She could feel the shape of the question in her throat. Who is Rachel, and what happened, and why didn't you tell me? But before she could speak, he rolled toward her and said, "I'm really happy. I hope you know that. This is the most stable I've ever felt." And the word stable landed oddly. A man doesn't describe his life as stable unless he's comparing it to something unstable. She let the question dissolve. She said, "I'm happy too." It wasn't a lie. It also wasn't the whole sentence. You might be wondering why she didn't just ask, and the answer is more complicated than fear. Celeste wasn't afraid of conflict. She managed a team of 12 people. She'd negotiated severance packages and firing conversations, and once, memorably, stared down a vendor who'd tried to double bill her company for $70,000. She knew how to ask hard questions. What she didn't know was how to ask a question whose answer might mean she'd married a stranger. That's not fear. That's triage. She was protecting the marriage long enough to find out if it was real. Because here's the thing about the secret you learn on your wedding night. It doesn't just poison the past, it poisons the present. Every time Ian was kind to her, she wondered if the kindness was guilt. Every time he said, "I love you," a small voice in the back of her mind added a footnote. But you don't know everything about him, so does he mean it the way you mean it? She was living inside a constant, low-grade epistemological crisis about her own husband. And she was doing it alone. She didn't tell anyone. Not her mother, not her best friend, not the therapist she'd stopped seeing 2 years ago and considered calling again. Because saying it out loud, "There's a woman named Rachel and I don't know who she is, and I've been married for months and I'm too scared to ask," would make it real in a way she wasn't ready for. Silence was the only thing keeping the floor under her feet. So she waited. She watched. And she set a deadline. 1 year. On their first anniversary, she would ask. Whatever Ian's answer was, she would deal with it then. With a full year of evidence behind her, with a clearer sense of who he actually was versus who she'd assumed he was. She marked the date in her private calendar, the one he didn't share. October 14th. The deadline gave her something to hold on to. A future version of herself who would finally know. And if you're someone who's ever carried an unasked question through the quiet parts of a relationship, through birthdays and Sunday mornings and the moment right before sleep, you know exactly why Celeste's story matters here. If you want more stories that sit in that space, hit subscribe. I'd be glad to have you. What Celeste didn't know, couldn't have known, was that the deadline would hold. But the conversation wouldn't happen the way she planned, because 2 weeks before their anniversary, she found something that made asking unnecessary. Something Julian had said that night, the part she'd nearly forgotten, turned out to be the most important detail of all. Hold on to that, because she's going to use it. Not loudly, just precisely. 2 weeks before the anniversary she'd circled on her private calendar, Celeste drove to Ian's mother's house to pick up a box of his childhood things. Donna was downsizing, moving to a condo in Florida, and every visit now came with a cardboard box pressed into Celeste's hands. Old yearbooks, soccer trophies, a ceramic mug Ian had made in 5th grade art class that looked like it had melted and then been glazed anyway. Celeste accepted all of it. She liked Donna. She liked the unspoken message behind the boxes. You're family now. You keep the archives. This particular Saturday, Ian was out of town at a work conference. Celeste had offered to make the drive alone. 2 hours each way, autumn light through the windshield, the radio playing songs she didn't have to pretend to like. It felt like a small reprieve from the vigilance she'd been maintaining for 11.5 months. Donna met her at the door with coffee and a plate of lemon cookies. They sat at the kitchen table, the box between them on the floor, and talked about nothing important. The condo's HOA fees, Celeste's job, whether Ian was eating enough vegetables. It was easy, comfortable. Celeste almost forgot for 20 minutes that she was counting down the days until she might blow up her marriage. Then Donna said something that changed the math entirely. You know, I worried about him for so long. After the accident, I really thought he'd never let anyone in again. Celeste's hand stopped halfway to a lemon cookie. The accident. Not Rachel, not a breakup. An accident. She kept her face neutral. She'd gotten very good at that. It was hard for him, she said, the words deliberately empty, a mirror waiting for Donna to fill it. Donna nodded, her eyes going somewhere distant. I still think about her parents. They lost their daughter, and then the whole thing with the lawsuit. I don't think Ian ever forgave himself. Not really. Even though the court cleared him. Celeste's pulse was in her ears now. The court cleared him. She repeated the phrase in her head, turning it over. You don't get cleared by a court for breaking up with someone. You don't get cleared for a messy relationship that ended badly. You get cleared when something happened, something with legal consequences, something involving a death. Donna seemed to realize she'd said too much. Her expression shifted, that quick maternal recalibration, the instinct to protect her son even from his own wife. But he's good now. You're so good for him, Celeste. He's lighter than I've seen him in years. He's told me, Celeste said. The same words she'd used on her wedding night. The same lie. But this time, she wasn't saying it to protect a drunk best man from embarrassment. She was saying it to keep Donna talking. It worked. Donna smiled, relieved. Good. I'm glad he finally felt safe enough to share that with someone. He carried it alone for so long. Celeste stayed another hour. She drank her coffee. She ate 2 more cookies. She accepted the box and hugged Donna goodbye and drove home in the gathering dark with her husband's childhood artifacts in the back seat and a single word rotating in her mind like a screensaver. Accident. Death. Lawsuit. Cleared. The man she'd married, the man she'd been watching for a year, waiting for him to confess a bad breakup or a messy ex or an embarrassing romantic failure, had been carrying something else entirely. Something that left someone dead. Something that went to court. Something he had never, in 6 years of knowing her, in a year of marriage, found the words to say out loud. She pulled into their driveway at 9:30. The house was dark, Ian still away. She sat in the car for a long time with the engine off, staring at the garage door, at the flower beds she'd planted in the spring, at the life she'd built with a man who had a sealed file somewhere with his name on it. And then she did what anyone with her particular skill set would do. She started researching. She didn't sleep that night. Celeste sat at the kitchen table with her laptop, a cup of tea gone cold beside her, and typed combinations of words into the search bar that she'd never imagined needing. Ian and accident. Ian and lawsuit. Ian and Rachel. Because she had a name now, a name Julian had given her on the wedding night, and Donna had circled around without ever saying. It took her 40 minutes of dead ends, of archived local news sites with broken search functions and social media profiles that had been scrubbed or abandoned, before she found the right combination. Rachel Donnelly Accident Settlement Ian. The first result was a PDF of a civil court filing. The second was a news article from a small regional paper dated 8 years ago, with a headline that made her stomach drop. Family settles wrongful death suit against local man in boating incident. The article was short, clinical. A 26-year-old woman named Rachel Donnelly had drowned during a weekend trip on a lake in upstate New York. She'd been on a boat with 3 other people. Friends, the article called them. The boat had been operated by Ian, then 28, who had been drinking. The blood alcohol level was reported as .08, at the legal limit, not over it. The criminal charges were dropped. The civil suit, filed by Rachel's parents, was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. There was a photograph embedded halfway down the page, a group shot, the same group shot Celeste had found in Ian's book 2 months after the wedding. But this version was uncropped. She could see Rachel's face now. She could see Ian's arm around her. She could see that Rachel wasn't just some friend at a barbecue. She was his girlfriend. They'd been together for 2 years. Celeste stared at the screen until the words blurred. This was not a messy breakup. This was not an ex-girlfriend who'd hurt him. This was a woman who died. A woman whose parents buried their daughter. A woman Ian had been responsible for. Not criminally, the state had decided, but civilly, and the civil finding meant something. It meant someone looked at the evidence and concluded that his actions, his choices, had contributed to her death. And he had never told the woman he married. She closed the laptop. She walked to the bathroom and stood with both hands on the sink, looking at her own face in the mirror. The same face that had smiled through a wedding reception, through a year of Sunday mornings and dinner parties and "How was your day?" while this fact sat beneath the floorboards of her marriage. She didn't cry. She was too still for crying. She was in that state where shock and clarity overlap, where everything makes a terrible kind of sense, but you can't yet feel it. The next morning, she called Julian. Not Ian, Julian, the man who'd started all of this with a drunk confession at her wedding. She found his number in Ian's phone while Ian was still out of town. She'd never needed it before. And she called him without fully planning what she was going to say. He answered on the 3rd ring, clearly having worked late or stayed out late. "Celeste? Everything okay?" She said, "I need you to tell me about Rachel. The full version. Not what you thought Ian told me. Everything you know." She could hear him swallowing, could picture him sitting up in bed, suddenly very awake. "He didn't tell you?" "No, Julian, he didn't tell me." What followed was a 40-minute phone call in which Julian, haltingly, guiltily, filled in the gaps the news article couldn't. Rachel had been Ian's girlfriend. The lake trip was an annual tradition, a group of college friends renting a cabin for a long weekend. Ian had been drinking, but nobody thought he was drunk. The accident happened at dusk, when visibility was low. Rachel fell overboard. Ian tried to circle back. The boat hit something. A submerged log, the investigation concluded, and Rachel was struck. She was pulled from the water too late. The coroner ruled it an accidental drowning with contributing blunt force trauma. The criminal case was dropped because Ian's BAC was exactly at the legal threshold, and there was no evidence of reckless operation. The civil case settled because Rachel's parents were devastated, and Ian's family had money, and the lawyers advised him to make it go away. He'd been paying a portion of his income to the Donnelly family ever since, not court-ordered, part of the settlement terms, something Julian only knew because Ian had borrowed money from him once to cover a payment. "He's never forgiven himself," Julian said. "I think that's why he never told you. He wanted to be someone new, someone who hadn't done that." Celeste listened without interrupting. She stored every detail. And when Julian finally ran out of words, she said, very quietly, "Thank you for telling me." She hung up. She sat on the edge of the bed she shared with Ian. She looked at the photograph on the nightstand. Their wedding. Her in white. Him looking at her like she was the answer to something. And she realized the thing that made this impossible to resolve cleanly. Ian hadn't lied to her, exactly. He'd just never told her. He'd built a life with her around an absence. And now she had to decide. Was this a man who'd done something terrible and tried to bury it? Or was this a man who'd been carrying a weight so heavy he couldn't speak it, and marriage had been his first real attempt to believe he deserved to be loved anyway? The answer to that question depended entirely on what happened when she finally asked him. And that conversation was now 3 days away. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before that, there's something you need to understand about what Celeste found next, the thing that made the decision for her before she ever said a word. Ian came home on a Tuesday evening. Celeste met him at the door, kissed him, asked about the conference. She made dinner, pasta with the lemon and garlic sauce he liked, and listened while he talked about panel discussions and mediocre hotel coffee and a client who'd nearly derailed the whole deal. She laughed in the right places. She poured him a second glass of wine. She was performing normalcy so precisely that it felt almost like an out-of-body experience, as though she were watching a version of herself who hadn't spent the past 72 hours dissecting her husband's secret history. He didn't notice anything. That was the part that unsettled her most. He looked at her across the table with the same easy affection he'd always had, and he didn't see that she'd become a different person, a person who knew things. If he couldn't read that shift in her, what else had he been missing? She waited until he fell asleep. His breathing deepened, that familiar rhythm she'd memorized over a year of shared nights. Then she slipped out of bed and went to his study. The study was Ian's space, but it wasn't off limits. She'd been in it dozens of times, borrowing a pen, dropping off mail, once falling asleep on the small couch while he worked late. But she'd never gone through his things. She'd never opened a drawer with intention. Tonight, she did. She started with the filing cabinet in the corner. Tax returns, insurance policies, a folder labeled House 2023. Everything organized, everything exactly where it should be. Ian was a meticulous record keeper. She'd always known that. What she was looking for wouldn't be in the obvious places. She moved to the bookshelf. Behind a row of business hardcovers, leadership manifestos, industry biographies, the kind of books people display but rarely read, she found a banker's box. Plain cardboard, no label. She lifted it onto the desk, removed the lid, and felt the floor of her marriage shift underneath her. Inside was everything he'd never told her. Photographs. Dozens of them. Rachel at the beach. Rachel at a birthday dinner. Rachel laughing with icing on her nose. A folded newspaper clipping from the local paper. The same article Celeste had found online, but this one was creased and worn, as though it had been handled many times. A copy of the civil settlement, signed by Ian and by Rachel's parents, with a notary stamp in the corner. And beneath all of that, a bundle of letters. The letters were from Rachel's mother. Celeste read them with shaking hands. The first one was dated a year after the settlement. Ian, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if I even want you to. But the money you send every month, I need you to know it pays for Rachel's niece's preschool. Her name is Maya. She has Rachel's eyes. I thought you should know something good has come from this. The tone wasn't warm exactly, it was raw, complicated, but it wasn't hateful either. The second letter dated 2 years later. Maya asked about her aunt today. I told her Rachel is in heaven. I didn't know how to explain the rest. I still don't. But I wanted you to know that I've stopped being angry at you. I don't know why that matters, but it felt important to say. The third letter was shorter, dated 5 years ago, around the time Celeste had first met Ian. Richard's health is failing. He wanted me to tell you he doesn't blame you anymore. He wanted you to know before it's too late. I hope you've found some peace. I hope you're okay.
There were more. Celeste read them all, and by the time she reached the bottom of the bundle, something had cracked open inside her that she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't pity exactly. It wasn't forgiveness either. She hadn't decided yet what there was to forgive. It was recognition. Ian was a man who had done something terrible, and then he had spent 8 years quietly, privately, trying to be accountable for it. He'd sent money. He'd read the letters. He'd kept the photographs, not hidden but preserved, tucked away like something sacred and unbearable. The box wasn't a secret he'd buried. It was a reliquary. But he hadn't told her. That was the knot she couldn't untie. She could understand why he wouldn't lead with this on a first date, or a third, or even a 10th. She could understand why he'd built a wall around it and lived behind that wall for years. But she was his wife. She'd stood in front of everyone they loved and promised him forever. And he had let her do it without knowing who she was promising forever to. She closed the box. She put it back on the shelf, behind the business hardcovers, exactly where she'd found it. She walked back to the bedroom and stood in the doorway, watching Ian sleep. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:17 in the morning. Their anniversary was tomorrow. She knew now what Julian had meant when he said Rachel messed him up. She knew what Donna had meant when she'd said, I worried about him for so long. She knew what Ian had been carrying, alone, in the dark for 8 years. She knew the shape of his silence and the weight of his guilt, and the careful, meticulous way he'd tried to atone without ever letting anyone witness it. What she didn't know, what she still had to find out, was why he'd kept it from her. What he thought she would do if she knew. Who he thought she was. And that detail, the one that seems small, is the one that makes everything else make sense. Their anniversary fell on a Thursday. Ian had made reservations at the restaurant where they'd had their first date, a small Italian place with checkered tablecloths and a wine list he always pretended to understand. Celeste had been planning this conversation for a year, and she still didn't know what she was going to say until she was sitting across from him, halfway through her osso buco, the candle between them burning low. She set down her fork. I need to tell you something, she said, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. Ian's expression shifted, not alarmed, but attentive. He put his own fork down. He nodded. On our wedding night, she said. Julian came up to me after his speech. He asked if you'd told me about Rachel. He assumed you had. I told him you had, because I didn't know what else to say, and because I didn't want to start our marriage with a scene at the reception. She paused. Ian's face had gone still in a way she'd never seen before. I've been waiting a year to ask you who she was, and 2 weeks ago, your mother mentioned an accident, and I went looking. She told him what she'd found: the article, the settlement, the letters from Rachel's mother, the banker's box behind the business books. She told him about the year she'd spent watching him, waiting for him to trust her enough to speak the thing he'd been carrying. She told him she understood why he hadn't mentioned Rachel on their first date, or their fifth, or even after they got engaged. But she didn't understand why he'd let her marry him without knowing. I've been alone with this for a year, she said. Not the secret. Your secret. I've been alone with the not knowing, with the waiting, with the question of whether the man I married was someone who did something terrible and hid it, or someone who did something terrible and couldn't face it. And I need to know which one you are. The restaurant moved around them. Waiters circulating, wine glasses clinking, someone laughing 2 tables over. But their corner of it had become a sealed room. Ian didn't look away from her. His hands were flat on the table. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he said very quietly, "There's something else in the box." She waited. "There's a letter I wrote to you, before the wedding. I've rewritten it maybe 20 times. I've never been able to give it to you." He told her the rest then. Not defending himself, not asking for sympathy. Rachel had been his girlfriend. The lake trip was a tradition. He'd had 2 beers over the course of the afternoon. He'd told the investigators 3. And he genuinely believed he was fine to operate the boat. The light was bad. Rachel was standing near the bow, laughing at something, and when the boat hit a wake, she lost her balance. He'd turned the boat too fast, trying to reach her. That was the part the civil suit focused on. Not the drinking, but the panicked turn that caused the secondary impact. The part he'd never forgiven himself for. "I didn't tell you," he said, "because I was terrified you'd look at me the way I look at myself. And I thought if I could just be the version of me that exists after, the one who pays the settlement and reads the letters and tries to be decent, then maybe that version deserved you. But I couldn't hand you the before. I couldn't make you carry it." Celeste listened. And somewhere in the middle of his words, the thing she'd been holding for a year, the vigilance, the doubt, the exhausting calculus of whether her marriage was real, began to loosen. Not because what he'd done was okay, because he wasn't hiding from it. He was drowning in it, alone, and he'd mistaken silence for protection. He'd thought he was shielding her from his damage. He hadn't understood that the silence itself was the damage. She reached across the table and took his hand. "You don't get to decide what I can carry," she said. "That's not how marriage works. You tell me the hard thing, and I decide if I can hold it. But you don't get to make that decision for me." He nodded. His eyes were wet. The candle flickered between them. They stayed at the restaurant until it closed. They went home and he showed her the letter he'd written, the one he'd never been able to give her. It was dated 3 days before their wedding. It said everything he'd just told her, but written in the desperate, unpolished voice of a man who was about to marry someone he loved and couldn't bear the thought of losing. He'd signed it, folded it, and put it in the box behind the business hardcovers, where it had sat for a year while his wife waited for him to find the courage. Celeste read it twice. Then she put it back in the box and closed the lid. "I don't need this anymore," she said. "You already told me." And that's where this story lands. Not with a dramatic confrontation, not with a divorce or a screaming fight or a moral that wraps up neatly.
It lands with two people sitting on the floor of a study at 1 in the morning, the evidence of the worst thing that ever happened to him spread out between them, and her choosing to stay. Not because she was naive, because she finally had the whole picture, and the picture, complicated as it was someone she could trust. Here's the question this story leaves me with. We talk a lot about the lies people tell in relationships, the active deceptions, the hidden phones, the fabricated alibis. But what about the silences? The things someone doesn't tell you not because they want to manipulate you, but because they're ashamed or scared or convinced the truth will cost them the only good thing they have left. Is silence the same as a lie? Or is there a difference? And does that difference matter?
I don't think there's one answer. I think it depends on what they do when the silence finally breaks. Ian had 8 years to tell Celeste. He didn't. But when she finally asked, he didn't deflect, he didn't minimize, he didn't make her feel crazy for waiting. He handed her the letter he'd been too afraid to give her and let her decide. And that, the moment after the silence, might be the real test. Not whether someone tells you the truth unprompted, but whether they honor it when you finally ask for it. If you've ever been the person carrying a question you were afraid to ask, or a truth you were afraid to tell, I want to hear from you in the comments. Was there a silence in a relationship that changed things? And when it broke, what happened next? I read every single one. And if this story resonated, I think you'll want to watch the one I'm linking on screen right now, about a woman who discovered something her husband was hiding. But she didn't wait a year. She waited a decade. And what she found rewrote everything she thought she knew about her marriage. I'll see you there. As always, I'm Hanni. This is Wettedy. People always show you who they are. We just slow it down.